How would you like to be eligible for the maximum amount of financial aid as possible and prevent your family from falling victim to the student debt crisis? Now, obviously, most parents watching this video are going to say, well, of course we want to do this. And I understand that. But I did mention something there at the end of that statement regarding the student debt crisis. So what I want to do is frame this entire conversation and this video around the current debt crisis, because that's the major aspect of what we're going to talk about here today and what we're trying to avoid. So I'm going to start with a simple chart that really explains what we're talking about, because you might have heard about the student debt crisis in the news lately. It's a very hot topic as far as politics is concerned. Or you might have heard about it from a neighbor or a friend, a brother or sister, maybe even your own debt from when you were in college as a parent. But let's really look at some of the numbers to see what we're talking about in 2019 when it comes to student debt. This chart here really breaks down exactly what we're talking about as far as the cost of college and this upward trajectory that it's been on over the last 35 to 40 years. Now, this chart is from 1978 to 2008, so obviously it's not completely up to date as far as the time frame is concerned, but it's still extremely accurate as far as depicting the cost of college and how it's risen over that time. Around 1980, the cost of college began a trend that, at its peak, would see an increase of nearly 3 to 5 times the rate of inflation as far as the cost of attendance year over year. Private schools that once cost $10,000 a year now cost anywhere from $30,000 to $70,000. And state schools, traditionally costing much less than private universities, now cost anywhere from $15,000 to $30,000 a year. There is simply nothing that compares to this. The drastic price increase in the cost of college is one of the main reasons why we're in the student debt crisis right now. The other reason is the fact that these prices have increased, but the approach families and parents take as far as applying for college financial aid hasn't changed. Now, let me just be clear about this. I'm going to reference this a couple times during this video, but I am not blaming the parents. It's the system that's broken. So don't get me wrong. I'm not pointing the finger at you as parents. It's just the environment that we live in. And unfortunately, most families are still taking what I consider is the old approach. And as you can see here, to me, it's kind of like taking shots in the dark or being blindfolded and asking a person to shoot a bullseye with an arrow. That's really difficult to do. You might get lucky and hit a bullseye one out of every 100 or 1,000 times, but when your son or daughter's future is on the line, almost all the parents I've ever interacted with would much rather take a different approach and drastically increase their odds. The families who fall victim to the student debt crisis are usually those families who still take this old approach, and they know very little at all about the college financial aid system, and more importantly, how it works. Even though the system is going to be very complex with many different variables and moving parts over the years. But a system that, when studied, can be used in your favor, and at the end of the day, it's going to be really your only resource, other than maybe yourself, to help offset that cost of college. So here's a quick example. Would you be surprised to know that determining financial aid eligibility has a tremendous amount to do with the school you pick, and contrary to what most parents think, your income level is not the only factor. Many parents think, well, my income is X, so that means we automatically will qualify for Z as far as our financial aid award. And unfortunately, this is just not true. Your school selection is an enormous factor. Yet most families leave this process and decision solely up to their 18-year-old son or daughter. Now let's think about this for a second. It's really the equivalent of handing your son or daughter a blank check and telling them, you know what, we trust you. Go out and purchase a condo for the family. Or go out and purchase a townhouse for the family. Now, who in their right mind really thinks this is a good idea? I was 18 once, just like everyone else listening to this video, and I wouldn't hand myself a blank check when I was 18. Even the most prudent and mature 18-year-olds, this would be an enormous burden. Not to mention, think about the enormous consequences of the decision as far as down the road if they choose the wrong school when it comes to financial aid. Now they have that burden of 6 figures worth of debt, possibly, to start off their business careers and adult lives that they're going to try to manage now for the next 20, 25, or 30 years. No 18-year-old should have to make such an important decision at such an early point in their life. I put a quote up here from Benjamin Franklin, and obviously everybody knows Ben Franklin. He's had a lot of great quotes, and this one is one of my favorite, and it really applies to this situation. And it's by failing to prepare, you're preparing to fail. And again, this goes back to the old approach. If you just take the old approach and just informally go about the process, like you're blindfolded or leave it up to your son or daughter to choose the school and never factor in the financial aid, don't be surprised if you get negative results. Only parents who take a systematic approach when navigating the financial aid process will have the peace of mind of saying, I've done everything I could to prevent my family from falling victim to the student debt crisis. So I've said a lot here in the first couple of minutes of this video, and you might be wondering, who is this guy and why is he so depressing? Trust me when I say I'm not trying to depress you. That's not my goal. My name is Mike Daly, and I'm the founder of College Funding Professionals. For nearly a decade, I've been working one-on-one with families and helping them through the financial aid process. Our motto is preventing a student debt crisis one family at a time. And I'm very comfortable saying that I am an expert in this system. I've studied it for years. I've presented at dozens and dozens of schools and venues, and I've sat at hundreds of kitchen tables directly helping families navigate their way through this. So, with that being said, let's talk about some of the items that I'm going to share with you on this video. So first, I'm going to share with you the biggest mistake most families make when applying for financial aid. The second is the two things that families who I've worked with understand that the average family just does not. And the third will be a simple, proven, 4-step system that you can start today that will prevent your family from falling victim to the student debt crisis. So if you're a parent looking to position your family to be eligible for the maximum amount of financial aid as possible and prevent your family from falling victim to the student debt crisis, you have definitely come to the right place. So let's take a look at the top 3 categories of people or parents that I work with. I work with first-timers and their families going through the financial aid process, obviously for the first time. I also work with second-timers, and you guessed it, these are families that have gone through it already and they're on their second time going through the process, or even their third time through. And they realized how complex the process was and probably didn't get that great of results the first time around. And then the third is single parents. And these are parents raising children on their own or with very limited help. And based on the data we have internally as far as looking at all the families we've worked with over the years, I noticed about 30% of those families actually fall into this single parent category. And that's the reason why I specifically highlighted it here. Because it looks like that these parents really get great value from working with us. So now that you know the 3 general categories of the parents we work with, let's meet a couple parents specifically that I've worked with in the past. And let's a quick note before we talk about these clients. In an effort to respect everyone's privacy, since we are discussing finances and children as well, I'm only using first names, and I've blacked out some personal information, as you can see. So first up is Anna. Anna was remarried after a divorce, and her and her husband were both business professionals with very hectic schedules. Now, they were referred to me from a previous client, which is obviously always a great compliment. She had a son of her own, as well as 3 stepchildren, and they had a household income that was well into the 6 figures, but they still ended up getting some very good financial aid awards. Let's zoom in here and take a look at this email that Anna had sent to me. Now, this particular email, you see me explaining to her that we had just won an appeal from Virginia Tech. And yes, you can appeal financial aid awards, which most people don't realize. And just like everything else during this process, there is a system to follow when doing so. As you can see, Anna is very happy to hear the news and is eagerly awaiting a response from Rutgers. You also see she mentioned something in her email called family contribution. And we will discuss this a little later on in the video, as it's a major component to the financial aid discussion. And after adding up all the appeals from all the schools we applied to, in aggregate, we were able to increase the awards for Anna and her son by more than $10,000, which is just outstanding results. The second client is Lolly. Now, Lolly was divorced and raising her daughter on her own. She was a bookkeeper for a local business and had an average household income. Her daughter was very much into criminal justice, so her dream school was John Jay College in Manhattan, which is universally known for their criminal justice system. Let's look at this email that Lolly had sent me. In this particular email, I am responding to Lolly after she just sent me a very panicked, anxious email about not receiving any other awards yet from other schools that her and her daughter had applied to. And as you can see by her response, my previous email was reminding her that taking the stress out of the situation was the reasons why she hired me in the first place. This is a common theme among single parents. In my experience, they feel completely overwhelmed by the entire process for applying financial aid. Now, you've heard me mention a couple times the financial aid process. And you're probably wondering, what is the financial aid process? Don't you just apply for aid and wait to hear back? Well, that answer is a resounding no. There's a lot more to it, and this is something else we will discuss in a couple minutes. But getting back to Lolly, even though she was anxious, you can see that her and her daughter were also excited and happy about the progress we made so far. At the end of it all, she was able to go to John Jay College, her dream school, for an out-of-pocket cost of only $2,000, actually less than $2,000. And John Jay has an average cost of attendance per year of $30,000. Again, outstanding results for Lolly and her family. I mentioned earlier about parents needing to take a systematic approach, just like Anna and Lolly did. So let me touch on a few bullet points about that approach. First off, one of the cornerstones is targeting schools with the very best financial aid philosophies, as every school has a different approach when it comes to generating financial aid awards. The second is, this approach works for families with average household incomes, as well as families with household incomes well into six-figure territory. There's a big misconception out there that financial aid is only out there for those families with average or below average incomes. Frankly, this is just not true. And lastly, the systematic approach is based on proven results and years worth of trial and error and real world experience that I've gathered by working closely with hundreds of families. Now, in addition to formulating a systematic approach, I also identified one big mistake that the majority of all families all make. The best way I can describe this is really a story about the Wright brothers and how they invented the world's first airplane. Back in 1903, the race was on to invent the world's first airplane that could fly. Now, as you can see from this slide, the first airplane models are pretty funny compared to what we see here in 2019. This one in particular looks like a big bird with a huge engine stuck in the middle. And I don't know about you, but there's no amount of money that would get me to stand in the middle of that platform like that gentleman is doing. So, the main problem was that people started building larger and larger engines with more and more horsepower and completely ignored the aerodynamics in the wings. Well, this resulted in some of the fanciest, most powerful engines the world's ever seen, but it also resulted in planes that could not fly. Complete and total failures. But the Wright brothers took a different approach. While the whole world was obsessed over engines, the Wright brothers looked at the plane's aerodynamics and wings. They focused on a plane that could glide without an engine first, and then strapped an engine to it later. Once they had the right recipe, they were ready to go, and boom, you have the world's first airplane, and the Wright brothers go down in history. Now, you might be wondering, what in the world does this have to do with financial aid? Well, I'll tell you. When applying for financial aid today, most families are repeating the history of the engine obsession. The biggest mistake most families make is being fixated with only the sticker price of a school. But in reality, all they're doing is strapping a larger and larger, more complex engine to a fundamentally flawed plane. And I promise this will all make sense in a couple slides. But first, quickly, I did mention sticker price 2 slides ago, so let's just look at sticker price and what the definition is. Sticker price is the price institutions, or colleges and universities, charge for tuition and fees as well as room and board. So I'm here in New Jersey. Our state school is Rutgers. The sticker price to live on campus at Rutgers in 2019 is roughly $30,000. Sticker price is derived from car dealerships that would put a big sticker on the window of a car with the price. So it's universally known in this arena that when you're talking about the sticker price of a college, it is the all-in one-year cost to attend that school. And it's comprised of tuition, fees, and room and board. It's a very big component to this. Now, remember how I told you that there's 2 things that families who I've worked with understand that the average family does not. Those 2 things are, 1, they understand the financial aid equation, and 2, they approach the financial aid process with a business mindset and take a systematic approach. Because it all comes down to this, and it's the financial aid equation. Now, if we never end up talking or doing any business together, if there's one slide throughout this entire video you should remember, it is this. Because everything regarding financial aid eligibility starts with this equation. No matter what school, no matter your income level, no matter what state you currently live in, it always starts with this equation and these variables. Cost of attendance minus expected family contribution equals need. shortly, for short, excuse me, COA minus EFC equals need. Again, this is an enormous part of the financial aid process, and it always starts with this financial aid equation. Now, expected family contribution. This is formulated by looking at a family's finances over a period of time. And this is what good old Uncle Sam in the school feels is the minimum amount. And I'm going to repeat that. The minimum amount your family will contribute out of pocket for the cost of attendance, or the sticker price we just talked about. This is a complex discussion in and of itself as far as expected family contribution, and it could really be its own 30-minute long video. So we're not going to dig into this too much, but just know what it is and that it can change in value depending on your financial situation and also the schools themselves. In addition, understand that there are some ways of reducing it depending on your specific situation. The other variable that is unbelievably important is the need amount. This is the amount of financial aid you are representing your family needs. As you can see here in this example I included, it's just a simple math equation. There's no subjectivity to this at all. Now, I mentioned earlier how schools have different philosophies when it comes to financial aid. Well, let's see how this plays out in this equation here. So this particular family, I said, had an expected family contribution of $20,000. I used $40,000 as the cost of attendance because it's kind of right in the middle of the range between state schools and private schools. So simple math, $40,000 minus $20,000 equals $20,000. So your family would represent a need of $20,000 to the particular school that you're applying to. Now, every school meets this need differently. Some might meet 55% of $20,000, while other schools might meet 95 or 100%. And another school might meet something right in the middle of those numbers. It literally runs the entire gamut. And every school has a different percentage. So, bringing it full circle and back to the old Wright brothers, you can see why fixating on the sticker price or the cost of attendance is not the correct way to go about this. And it's the equivalent of the engine obsession all the other inventors were plagued with. It's a variable in the equation, but you have no control over it. And I'm not saying it's unimportant, just like an engine isn't unimportant to an airplane. But it's not where you should start. Just like the Wright brothers gave all their attention in the beginning to the wings and aerodynamics, you need to focus on your expected family contribution and the need amount that you're representing and how the schools go about meeting that need and targeting the right schools. So let me ask you this. Going back to that old approach that I've referenced a couple times already. How many of you, if you asked a friend or neighbor who has gone through this process already, if you asked them, hey, so what was your expected family contribution? Or what need amount did you represent as a family when you applied for financial aid? How did you go about targeting the right schools? And what was the philosophy of the school that you ended up going to? Now let's be honest with one another. How many of them would know what you were talking about? Or how many of them will look at you like you were talking a completely different language? Well, unfortunately, I know the far majority of parents would have absolutely no idea what you were saying and look at you like you were crazy. Well, remember my client Anna? If you remember her email, she asked me to run a projection for expected family contribution based on an income level of $150,000. Well, why did she know these variables? Why did she know enough to ask me? Well, very simply enough, she wasn't taking shots in the dark or looking to hit a bullseye blindfolded. She was following a systematic approach. But again, those parents that you might ask the financial aid question to and ask them if they know about the equation, I'm not blaming them if they don't know. It's so very easy to get distracted. You're juggling your own personal life, most likely your own career. You're running a household which possibly has more than one child. And when you do have the time to think about college, you're most likely following the lead of your child. So you're thinking about campus, the dorms, the ratio of professors to students, the majors that they're going to offer. And when you do think about the financial piece, you're most likely going to fixate on the sticker price. Now listen, I can 100% relate to this. When I was 18 years old, 20-something years ago, I was an athlete, a football player to be exact, and I solely made my decision on where to go to college based on the opportunity I had with the football team at a particular school that I was looking at. And if I'm really being honest, the campus and the dorms and that whole college scene, that was a very close second. So trust me when I say I understand how easy it is to get distracted. So what does this systematic approach look like? I mentioned it a bunch of times. And why is it so important right now to implement it? Well, I think that question is answered best by looking at something that Hippocrates said. And if I'm butchering that name, I apologize. Okay, that's not my goal. So if anybody's on this video that's of ancient Greek heritage, I do apologize, but it's not the easiest name to say. But he was a great man. He was considered the father of medicine. The Hippocratic Oath, that's derived from him, and that's the oath that all doctors abide by, and his responsibility that he thought that doctors had to their patients. He also had some great quotes in his life, and I put one of them up there. For extreme diseases, extreme methods of cure, as to restriction, are most suitable. Now, some of you might be saying, Mike, I've been following along the whole time up to this point, but now you've completely lost me. What in the world does the father of medicine, some Greek guy from 400 BC, have to do with financial aid? Well, trust me, it applies, because this original quote morphed into something that's much more common today. And that is the quote, "Desperate times calls for desperate measures." And we are in desperate times. How do I know this? Well, the fact that currently we're in the middle of the worst student debt crisis in the history of this country is pretty convincing enough. And if you need a reminder, go back to those first couple slides when I talk about the cost of college in 2019 compared to 40 years ago. So if we all can agree that these are desperate times in relation to paying for your children's education, then you need to first adopt a totally new mindset prior to even thinking about the college financial aid process and how to go about it. And that is a business-like approach. For any of you that have bought or sold a house, it's very similar. You wouldn't just list a house with no market research and hope for the best. And at the same time, when looking to purchase a new home, you certainly wouldn't look at the sticker price of a house and just make a snap decision without asking a litany of questions, not to mention negotiating the price itself. Remember when I talked about the financial aid appeals in the beginning of this video? Well, this is your chance to negotiate in the context of the financial aid application process. This is a major reason why the far majority of people hire an expert, like a real estate agent, to assist them, because they're relying on that real estate agent's expertise in the marketplace, which is usually based on a certain track record. And the very best agents know that all the little nuances of the process that someone who is an insider just wouldn't be privy to. It's also very similar to filing a tax return and all the loopholes that any good tax professional tries to take advantage of to minimize the tax burden for their client. So if we can agree that the times that we are in are forcing us to take a different approach and mindset prior to even starting the process, once we're ready, then it comes down to how do we execute this approach? Well, I call this cracking the code. And the code in general is 4 bullet points, and it's mindset, knowledge, positioning, and system. Now, we already know mindset is everything. Once you're in the right mindset, then you need to know the knowledge of how the system works, how the financial aid equation is formulated, specifically your expected family contribution. How can you lower your expected family contribution to increase that need amount you're going to represent? How to target the right schools, how to fill out the applications correctly, and which schools are going to require more than just the basic application, which is known as the FAFSA. What are the deadlines? As every school will have a different deadline, there's no universal date. And when do the appeals process start? And that's the best way to go about appealing a financial aid award. And this is just a short list. But once you have the knowledge of how it all works, then you can figure out if there's ways to position your family to maximize the amount of financial aid eligibility that you're going to represent. And then finally, before you start the financial aid application process itself, you come up with a systematic approach you're going to take over the next 10 months, because it starts on October 1st and lasts to about August 1st. And you got to break it down into different stages. And that's in order to avoid getting completely overwhelmed. And again, I'm not trying to depress you. Trust me when I say that. But unfortunately, you have to go through this every year of college. It's as if every year it's its own separate entity. They do not run into one another. Now, why is this? Well, because if you're following along, your financial aid awards is based on your financial situation, which can change from year to year, as we all know. I'm going to share another quick personal story of mine. My freshman year of college, I had a roommate. His name was Justin. He was a great guy. We got along. He was my best friend. We played football together. We both went home for the summer. Justin calls me in August and says, "Mike, I got bad news. I'm not going to come back to school." I was completely devastated, and as you can imagine, so was he. I said, "Justin, what happened?" And he said, "I don't know. I got my financial aid award, and it's 2/3 less than it was freshman year." And I remember him telling me his freshman year award was a tremendous award. What happened was, unbeknownst to Justin, his family had sold a motorhome. What happened was it increased his income that he was showing on his tax return. And again, there's no subjectivity back to the financial aid equation. So when they plugged in the numbers for sophomore year, the math of the equation just produced a number that was literally 2/3 less as far as the award amount that he had gotten freshman year. So Justin had to leave school, unfortunately. And it's a shame because we were really great friends and we did kind of lose touch. But he did end up going to Rowan University and finishing out college, but that's really the outlier. And he became a successful teacher, but any other student in a similar situation, that could have derailed them. So obviously, his parents had no idea how it worked. And it could have been a disastrous situation. And that's just one example of many out there of people that go through the financial aid system and have no idea how it works and end up in some really bad situations. So, let's take a look at some more clients of mine and their results. So here's Ferdy. Ferdy was married with 2 daughters that were only 1 year apart. Both parents were physical therapists. They had a household income right around $100,000. So let's look at an email that Ferdy had sent me. And as you can see here, Ferdy is ecstatic about the grant that Duke University, which obviously everybody knows is a tremendous school, just gave his daughter that was worth $34,000. And for those of you who don't know, a grant is free money. You don't have to pay a single penny back of a grant. It's literally like a gift. So as you can imagine, they were ecstatic. And, you know, having aid like that that's completely a gift is really the name of the game and what we strive for. Let's look at another client of mine, and this is Amy, and I got to be honest, Amy is one of my all-time favorite clients, okay? She just had a great personality and sense of humor, and we got along extremely well. We're still friends to this day. And she was another divorced parent that was on her own as far as navigating the financial aid process. She is a teacher currently in New Jersey and has 2 sons, a couple years apart. And she had a household income slightly above the national average. Let's zoom in here. First, you can see the award that her son had received from Boston University for $60,000. Again, a tremendous award. Second, up on the top here, is Amy letting me know that she thinks it's going to be BU because, as she puts it, almost got a full ride. And as you can see, she thinks Texas just doesn't have any money as far as the University of Texas. And then lastly, you can see that's a text message from Amy expressing to me how much she appreciated my help. And as you can imagine, messages like that are extremely gratifying. At the end of the day, you know, this is really what it's all about. And when I have some bad days at the office, I like to look at messages like that and remember what the reasoning behind what we're doing here. And it's really to help parents like Amy and to get responses like that. And obviously, $60,000 award is a tremendous award to a school like BU or Boston U, which is a great, great school. Now, you must have the right system in place to generate these types of results. But it's totally up to you. You could try to go about it on your own. But in my experience, that's like trying to find the combination to a keypad by just randomly hitting numbers and trying to crack the code. A keypad like this could have 10,000 different combinations. And again, this is just like taking a shot in the dark. And here's one final analogy. And as you can tell, I like analogies, so bear with me, but this is the last one, I promise. So personally, I like poker. Big poker player. I think it's a great game, specifically Texas Hold'em. Now let's be very, very clear. I'm not a professional gambler, and I don't spend my weekends in Las Vegas or Atlantic City. But I like playing fun games with my friends. But let me ask you this question. How come the same 10 or 15 players end up at the final table of the World Series of Poker every single year? Are these guys just the luckiest group of guys on the face of the earth? The answer is no. They position themselves in the best possible way by learning from years' worth of research and trial and error, and by following a systematic approach that, when done correctly, dramatically increases their odds of success. And that is the name of the game. Now, the good news for you is, over the last 10 years, I've done all the trial and error for you, and through that process was able to create the virtual counselor. So, you don't have to worry about cracking the code we talked about, because I've already done it for you and your family. All the heavy lifting is done. All you need to do is trust me in the process, get in the right mindset we talked about, and then starting with week 1, module 2, begin to gain the necessary knowledge you need. Now, speaking of that knowledge, a lot of parents who currently use the virtual counselor have told me that it's been a great help for not only them, but also for their kids. And what they told me was that they use the virtual counselor as a tool to teach their kids about this entire process and how it works, especially the school selection and how important it is. Because at the end of the day, the majority of this debt will be theirs. One mother in particular told me that her daughter might not want to hear this message from her since she's her mother, but hearing it from an outside source like this program has a much different effect. Now, I'd be lying if I said I envisioned this type of benefit when I built this course, but it's great to hear how some of the unique ways some parents utilize the virtual counselor as they go through it. Now, as far as you, when you go through this high school parents section, you're going to learn more about the all-important financial aid equation, and specifically the ultra-important variable, your expected family contribution, and how to position your family to be eligible for the maximum amount of financial aid as possible. Then lastly, you'll be ready to follow the systematic approach that I lay out step by step through the 4 stages of the financial aid process, which starts with week 3 of the course. Again, I'm thrilled you're here and listening to this introduction video, because that means you're one step closer to helping your family and also me and college funding professionals on our mission of preventing a student debt crisis one family at a time.